Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump addressing the nation yesterday morning after Iran's retaliatory strike. No casualties, and Trump characterizing it as Iran effectively standing down. It was clearly a face-saving strike, and restating his position with respect to Iran and nuclear weapons.
As long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. The American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe, and only minimal damage was sustained at our military bases. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world.
And he closed with an olive branch extended.
Finally, to the people and leaders of Iran, we want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it. I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It was a very gracious presidential moment for Trump. I support him 100%. But he did say something that piqued my interest, and probably yours too, when he talked about the missiles that were fired on Americans were paid for by American tax dollars.
The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration.
Well, $1.5 billion in cash, and money is fungible, so it's
Possible.
Certainly arguable. Yeah. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Michael Brendan Dougherty. He's a senior writer at National Review, visiting fellow for the for social, cultural, and constitutional studies at the American Enterprise Institute, and author of the book "My Father Left Me Ireland." I almost want to talk about that book more than Iran, but
we can get to it. We can do both, Dan.
Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Did the president strike the right notes yesterday in his remarks?
I thought the president struck the exact right notes yesterday, finally, after a few days where his Twitter feed was a little bit more disconcerting. I thought yesterday was pitch perfect. That, about a year ago, it was reported in the Washington Post that as Iran had been stepping up its provocations in the Middle East, that the United States had sent through diplomatic channels a line saying, our red line is if you kill a single American, there will be a vigorous response. And what you saw was in the attacks that killed the American contractor and wounded 3 American servicemen, Trump responded by killing this incredibly famous or infamous general, Soleimani, and Iran seems to have launched a simple face-saving attack and seems to be backing down. And that's exactly what you want to be using a military for, is to punish those who would harm Americans and to deter further harm.
But then
I think I think it's a much more effective use of the military than saying, okay, our response to terrorism is we're going to completely transform the societies from which the terrorists came from. This is far more direct, effective, limited, and justifiable. So I thought it was a big victory for President Trump, and everyone should be on the lookout in the Middle East for other reprisals or from proxies. But the president was right to spike the football yesterday.
Yeah, and it's, it was the war that wasn't. And then you have Nancy Pelosi moments later bringing, saying that today they're going to bring the War Powers Resolution to the floor aimed at limiting the president's military actions against Iran. Is that appeasing to the Iranians?
It is a little bit. I mean, this was this was something that was done on Iraqi soil, where we have an agreement with the current Iraqi government and where we have a current authorization of military force to act. We acted against an Iranian, but an Iranian who was commanding Shia militias in Iraq to do harm to Americans. So I don't think there was a legal issue with the president doing the strike at all, even though I would be happy in the long run for Congress to begin reclaiming its powers over foreign policy and war making in particular. But I don't even think what Nancy Pelosi is proposing would stop for Trump from doing what he did, and I don't think it should.
And it also won't make it over to the Senate in whatever form it passes in the House, but make it through the Senate, whatever form it passes in the House. And there's a competing resolution that Kane and Lee are working on in the Senate too. Fine, reassert your authority, but in terms of the central issue here, one of the other matters that Trump raised in his speech yesterday was European countries, our European allies, and our Joint Security Association, NATO, need to step up and take a more pronounced role in trying to get a better deal with Iran that ensures that they will not obtain nuclear weapons, and pens them in a little bit more, tries to get them to behave a little bit better, incentivizing them to at least.
Yeah, and I mean, the Europeans should have a major incentive to act and be more proactive. I mean, they want to avoid regional war because as war spread in Libya and in Syria, Europe was inundated with a refugee flow that contained terrorists in it, including the terrorist who masterminded the attacks on the nightclub in Paris in 2015. So they know from very bitter recent experience that good order in the Middle East is their interest, and they should be more involved. And just, in a way, Europe has been infantilized, right? The United States even leads from behind on military engagements that Europe chooses, like the war in Libya. But Europeans need to be able to defend themselves.
Speaking of the war in Libya, there's some remarkable rewriting of history going on in real time with respect to, the two previous administrations, both President Obama's and President Bush's, but especially President Obama's when it comes to congressional authorization for strikes, when it comes to endless wars in the Middle East, when it comes to warmongering, when it comes to spiking the football after you depose a principal terrorist. And in the Libyan case, as you mentioned, the principal terrorist had agreed to give up his WMDs, and we still took him out. So without a plan, without a succession plan, as per the ongoing Libyan civil war. So that deserves some comment, too, because you're not going to get it from the D.C. press corps.
Oh, no, and similarly in Syria, right? Obama set a red line about the use of chemical weapons. He announced that Bashar al-Assad had crossed it, and then he backed down from the promised consequences of that. Yet at the same time, even though Congress refused to take up a resolution for regime change in Syria because it was so unpopular here in the United States to do so, he still kept pouring special forces and intelligence assets into Syria and involving us in a long, drawn-out, complicated civil war, which we were not allowed to win, and which was funneling arms to Al-Qaeda in Syria. So this was, the critics of Trump have certainly picked the wrong time to make their stand against his foreign policy, because the past 10 days have been the most successful days of American foreign policy in perhaps 15 years.
And what did you make yesterday when President Trump accused the Obama administration of, supplying the funds to provide missiles that struck the 2 American bases in Iraq?
I mean, it was an epic troll.
Yes, yes. Well.
I mean, that was really chumming the waters in the press corps. Money is fungible, but Iran has had, its weapons supplies for a long time. I doubt that anyone could prove that the money handed over was immediately used to buy the specific weapons.
And Susan
But
Rice
be that
was
as
quick
it
to
may,
take
the
to the
point
air, to defend her former boss.
But the point he was making was that the Obama administration sought to control Iran through blandishments and presents and all carrots, very few sticks. And he's contrasting that with his policy, which included a very swift and grave smack to the face, and seemed to get an immediate positive result.
Well,
but like I said, it's still early days yet.
Well, in addition to trying to rewrite past failures, we have the present crop of Democrat hegemons. And what's their response to this? Well, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, two of the leading lights in the presidential race, meeting with yesterday evening members of the National Iranian American Council, which is a group that has been accused of lobbying on behalf of Tehran's behalf, in addition to playing a central role in what former Obama NSA Ben Rhodes called the administration's pro-Iran deal echo chamber. And this doesn't even get to Ilhan Omar suffering from PTSD over the killing of Soleimani. The left's antagonism or the left's antipathy towards Trump is making them so antagonistic to American interests. I just see them continuing to marginalize themselves.
There is almost a kind of insanity that sets in where Trump acts, especially when he seems to act in a way that is against the norm of the last 25 years of Washington, D.C. Policy. And then there's a giant freak out across Twitter, basically. Democrat politicians and their staffs are glued to their phones looking at Twitter. And they think that the competitively hysterical reactions on Twitter represent public opinion. And then they respond to that. And it's a millstone around the Democratic Party's neck at this point. And their fixation on, the most progressive voices on social media, the most hysterical ones, it could very well cost them a presidential election that they could win in 2020. Until they get off, I suspect they're not going to win a presidential election.
Michael Brendan Dougherty, senior writer, National Review, visiting fellow for social, cultural, and constitutional studies at AEI, and the book, My Father Left Me Ireland. Michael Brendan Dougherty, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed.